a wrong way to build a startup is to actually say, okay, current class of model capabilities is here, and now I'm going to spend a lot of effort in terms of fine-tuning, customization, data collection to then fix this like last mile issue with the fundamental capability, rather than actually building productization around delivering the intelligence and the actual utility, which is about probably more than intelligence, that is then going to be further enabled by the growth of capabilities just natively in the model itself.
Welcome to Founded and Funded. I'm Madrona Digital Editor Coral Garnick-Duckin, and today we have a special live episode with Madrona Partner Vivek Ramaswami and Jason Kwon, Chief Strategy Officer at OpenAI, one of our 2025 IA40 winners. This conversation explores OpenAI's thoughts about which markets they enter directly and which ones they support as a platform, how they think about AGI, and their overall perspective about where the space is headed, from compute and data to reasoning and agents. Anyone building an AI will benefit from this candid, in-depth discussion recorded during our 2025 IA Summit, where Jason joined us just days after OpenAI's groundbreaking releases about agentic commerce and their Sora app. With that, let's dive into it. Here's Vivek and Jason's live conversation.
Both of us came up from the Bay Area, me 2 days ago and Jason this morning, so We're glad to have him here. Jason's been part of the OpenAI leadership for almost 5 years now. Seen a lot there. There's no shortage of incredible and interesting things coming out of OpenAI. Let's go ahead and get started with this. What does being Chief Strategy Officer at arguably the most strategic company in AI and tech mean on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so the way I'm mostly thinking about my job is thinking about the external and bringing it inside the company. So nominally, the functions I work with a lot are legal, policy, global affairs, parts of trust and safety, and the legal part also brings me a lot in the deal making. But really, these are just it's the external world that's reacting to the technology. And there's a whole process of actually taking in these sets of considerations, especially when the technology is very disruptive, and thinking about how that should impact things like how we approach ecosystems through deal making or deal structures, how we should think about various policy measures, and how we should think about building solutions, working also with startups as well as big companies to address, various concerns. And so I think about that really on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the interesting things we've been talking about is OpenAI is best known for frontier models, everything from when GPT-3 was exploding into our worlds and then GPT-4 and beyond. Obviously, the ecosystem around those models is really exploding, and we often have this term of full stack of AI. What does a full stack of AI look like to you? How do you all think about that in OpenAI lens?
Yeah, so I think it starts with compute and data. And you could see us becoming a lot more active in this space in recent history, much more so than we were in years prior. Then there's the foundation model layer, which we've been active in for a long time. Then there's the application layer, ChatGPT, and then the applications that get built on the API. And those are essentially the basic several layers. And then sooner or later you'll have devices that are kind of custom built or purpose built for this kind of technology. You can even go more specifically within each of these layers, and in the future you'll probably see additional stratification, like at the application layer or in the model layer. You'll find infrastructure, like in terms of tooling, eval suites, things that have to do with cleaning or structuring data when it comes to task relevant data that you need to collect for post training. And so I think all of those elements you'll kind of see further deepening and development. And I think that's actually a very interesting way to think about what you should build as a founder going forward, because a lot of this will become very relevant, not just to us, but various other foundation model labs. And the pace at which all these labs can actually build all these tools and technologies at the various layers is not necessarily going to keep up with the pace at which the ecosystem can build all these things. And so there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. We're definitely going to get into the meat of how founders should be thinking about where OpenAI plays and where it doesn't, because I think it's so important and something we think about all the time. But going back to the point you were making around compute, infrastructure, the data, we're seeing all this news about hundreds of billions of dollars being poured into or about to be poured into the compute side and the infra side, and OpenAI has had amazing partnerships with NVIDIA and Oracle and so many others. And I think one of the cool things for us as early stage investors and founders is this CapEx build ends up being really, really great for building applications. But maybe just take us through some of those partnerships and, maybe just a little bit beyond the headlines, like why is it so important for OpenAI to be spending significant resources here around compute infra and with these partnerships involved?
Yeah, well, I think just the simplest answer is just because the scaling laws continue to work and we believe they will continue to work. And so that just implies that the amount of compute that we're going to need both for training as well as inference, if you want to continue to push ahead the capabilities, you're going to need increasing amounts of compute. And if you also believe that the demand for this technology is still in early innings, which would be the case if you kind of look at enterprise adoption, a lot of them are still in proof of concepts or pilot stages, and there's a lot more token consumption to come if you sort of are able to deliver on, deep use cases that get repeat usage. There's a lot more inference compute that you need that's implied in the future. And so that's really it, in terms of what is the actual impetus or driver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And so, one of the major themes that has kind of been running throughout the day and on the previous panels as well as, what we talk about this reasoning revolution, right? And I think on one of the previous podcasts you were on, you were also talking about reasoning and, the panel, the fireside chat we call today is a collaborative reasoning full stack. So curious, what does that mean to you? What does reasoning mean in the world of OpenAI and how you all think about the future of the reasoning revolution?
Yeah, I think there are at least two elements to it. There's probably more than that, but two that immediately come to mind. So one is just going back to the prior topic we were touching on, which is that the more compute that you apply at inference time, when you're using reasoning capabilities, the better the answers actually become, or the better the quality of the response. And so if you're in that kind of paradigm, you are now seeing this kind of relationship between compute and execution essentially. And the other thing that is very much you can kind of start to see develop right now, and this is I think been a topic today as well as possibly yesterday is agentic capabilities, which is really enabled by the reasoning stack, right? Because you can get to sort of task situations, and it's actually the reasoning capabilities that let the model understand what it's supposed to do, especially in situations that would normally confound sort of normal programmatic software. And you also can get into situations where systems can start to interact with each other because they both have reasoning capabilities. And you see elements of this previously with some of the tools that we put out, like deep research, or our search capabilities, which use elements of reasoning to unlock agentic capabilities, such as searching on your behalf, understanding what it's reading, doing analysis, and then writing the content in the report for you, which is agentic capabilities, but it's able to accomplish those things because it's reasoning through the task that you assign to it. And then up to one of our latest releases, which was on Monday, which had to do with agentic commerce with Stripe, which is now the ability for ChatGPT or other applications, if they want to make use of the protocol, which we open sourced, to have the ability to leverage API in the models to have transactions occur based on commerce stacks and reasoning logic interacting with them. So I think this is actually probably going to be one of the primitives in terms of capabilities or building blocks when it comes to AI that sort of unlocks a lot more building on top.
Yeah, no, that partnership and sort of announcement you had with Stripe on Monday was really interesting because I think one of the things that we think about is, okay, in this future of agents, how do they interact with each other and, and how do payments work? And there's so many parts down the line. Is your sense that that's something OpenAI will partner with a lot of sort of the next generation set of companies, or in the case of Stripe, one of the best payment companies out there? How do you think about what makes sense to partner versus what you're building yourself at OpenAI?
Yeah, so I think our core, our core activity is focusing on general intelligence. And so everything around that needs to be accessed or to work with that, is much more something that we're inclined to partner at. And so focusing on the foundation models and then the surrounding stack around it that enables us to deliver that efficiently and at scale, that's what we're focused on. But then taking that and interacting with commerce, taking that interacting with content, taking that interacting with other capabilities like research or whatnot, enterprise capabilities. Those are all things that other people have been doing for decades, and have a lot of expertise in. And this kind of ability to use reasoning to interface with an entire ecosystem, it's also kind of very consistent with the nature of intelligence to be able to kind of work with lots of different other systems. So I think partnership is really very consistent with that part of our mission.
Right. The kind of the interesting thing here is that like we always hear about OpenAI talking about its mission about finding and fulfilling our journey to AGI, and doing that in a way that's going to be beneficial to all of us. What does it mean on a day-to-day basis? So like, a lot of us hear about AGI from the outside. You guys are around that mission every single day. Like, what does it mean inside of OpenAI to be, working towards AGI?
Really, I think it's about staying research focused. So the company is still very much research-centric, research-driven company, despite the fact that most of the attention is still on the products. That is mostly what gets popularized. But inside the company, if you were to just kind of measure the amount of content at all hands, for example, like 90% of it is still talking about the research. And one of the things, for example, I like to talk about with the teams I work with is when you apply like a 5's why framework to something while you're doing something, it's like somewhere along the way to the 5th why, it should be like because that advances, helps, or supports some core research activity. And I think that is that's the one thing that's very consistent about the inside of the company.
Right.
Yeah.
So research at its core,
Yeah.
but product working in tandem with research.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And, I think one of the things that is always on the top of the head and mind for founders is if I build something, is OpenAI just going to build it? Or if I'm building something, what happens if OpenAI build it? I think the old, sort of question would be, what would happen if Google or Microsoft build it? Now, I think it's very reasonable to ask what happens if OpenAI builds it. So we see so much of the interesting applications, tools coming out of OpenAI. So how do you think about what you are building and what makes sense, on a 6, 12, 18-month sort of time frame, and to flip it on its head, like where is OpenAI not building?
Yeah. So I think like this is an interesting question, and we can talk about this a little bit too, in relation to stuff that we just did this week. So a very general answer would just be, if you look at our mission, it's about AGI. You could take issue with the fact that whether you believe the AGI is a useful concept or not, but the crux of it is that if it's on the critical path to kind of this general intelligence capability, that's something that we're going to be interested in. If it's not so much on the critical path to that by definition is something that we're going to be less interested in. And that seems ostensibly simple enough. But every so often, things will happen and maybe it's not so simple, or people get surprised. And so I think, a couple days ago, we released Sora, and I think some people kind of, wonder, well, is this actually on the path to general intelligence or not? And like, how does this actually fit? And I think that it's very easy to look at the form factor of the product and think, oh, that doesn't necessarily make sense. Mm-hmm. But I would just say, we'll look through to the actual capability, which is to understand the physical world, like as a world model, as a simulation that's represented through video. And there's a live question as to whether you can actually fully capture what you need to in order to get to general intelligence just through text, mm-hmm. right? And so if it's true that actually you need sort of representation of the world in like movie pictures, right? Then having this kind of advanced video capability is possibly quite important to having general intelligence of some sort, and that is why it is important.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's true. I think a lot of people would say, hey, you talk about AGI, but then you're coming out with really, really good video models, and there's a lot of companies going after building video models and applications. So your sense is, these are things that are the outgrowth of needing the data and needing these modalities and the information that comes from to fulfill our ultimate goal,
which is general intelligence,
which is AGI. Yeah. So how would you, if you've got a bunch of founders in the audience here who are building various things and thinking about building various things, what do you think are the open areas that OpenAI is probably not going to end up building against that you would suggest founders should focus on?
Yeah. So great question.
But then you can't do this next week. So
Yeah.
that's the.
So I think it's just, posing that question. And I think that there are two ways to think about this. One is, hey, what is not necessarily going to be, straight down, the middle of the fairway when it comes to that general intelligence question. And so if you're going to do some kind of, product that is very focused on, figuring out how to apply, the AI models to like a manufacturing process, that's like very specific. That's probably not an area that we're going to go, super deep in terms of like developing a whole product suite, right? And like that's just an example of how to think through it. There's another way to kind of think through this too, which is that, and we see this happen all the time, and maybe founders in the audience actually have experience with this, which is you might be in a particular area and the current class of models are just a little bit short of being good enough to address the use case that you have. Maybe they're slightly too expensive, or maybe they're slightly not reliable enough, or maybe they just don't quite hit the use case to the level that you want. The interesting thing to do then is actually to bet on the increasing quality of the general capability of the models as just like a macro force. And that is an interesting way, I think, to also build a startup, because we've definitely seen a few where it's just that is what they've done, rather than try to over-optimize on this particular set of capabilities that you see on the models today, but actually just bet that the general capability will continue to improve. And I think that would be perhaps like a wrong way to build a startup, is to actually say, okay, current class of model capabilities is here, and now I'm going to spend a lot of effort, in terms of fine-tuning, customization, data collection, to then fix this like last mile issue with the fundamental capability, rather than actually building productization around delivering the intelligence and the actual utility, which is about probably more than intelligence, that is then going to be further enabled by actually the growth of capabilities just natively in the model itself.
Right. Yeah. So don't assume that the models are not going to get better, basically.
Yeah.
And build around that. Maybe I wanted to just make sure we have enough time for folks to ask questions. And so I'll open it up to the audience here in case anybody has anything they'd like to ask. I see a hand in the back there.
Profitability standpoint, with the cost of inference still being, a non-trivial number, how do you think about the business model from a profitability standpoint? And at what point do you see an inflection where the gross margins from a user perspective become positive and compelling?
Yeah. So for ChatGPT itself, we're actually profitable in most markets if you look at it on our compute, like based on compute margin. And it's actually the overall company may not be profitable because we continue to invest in actually scaling the compute and also scaling research. Or maybe scaling is not the right word, but continue to reinvest in research. And so maybe the question behind the question is, what is sort of like, what is the lesson for other companies, maybe in terms of how you should think about, the business model, if OpenAI is kind of in this kind of financial situation. And I think it's probably, you should be thinking about the margins relative to serving compute, really. And then, what other costs actually go into, sort of like your variable input. But I think if you are doing well, sort of on the basis of, here's how much you pay for compute, and then here's how much you actually get per unit of whatever delivery, and you're, positive on that, then actually that, like, in a very plain English sense, the core input, which is compute, you're actually deriving more value out of than you're paying for. And then you can probably also have a theory that the cost of compute itself is over time going to decline.
Actually, picking up on that comment about we didn't talk too much about financials and the revenue explosion of OpenAI, which is, unlike anything we've ever seen. And, more on a personal note for you, you joined OpenAI in early 21, right, as GC. So months before ChatGPT really exploded in the public consciousness. What surprised you the most about that launch and what you've seen since then? Has that really transformed the company And from what you remember pre-ChatGPT?
Yeah. So this goes back to the what we were talking about earlier, which is like trying to stay research focused, which is that's actually a struggle, right? So it's something you have to work on. And it was much easier to be a research focused company naturally when the rate of change inside the company itself was not ChatGPT like.
Right.
And so prior to ChatGPT, I think we were about 200 people, and we were not adding that many people per month. And then after ChatGPT, we 3x'd every year in terms of headcount since then. And that's a painful amount of headcount growth. And so we're still relatively small compared to lots of companies, but in terms of experiencing that amount of change, it takes a lot of effort, I think, to sort of retain certain types of working habits and styles and prioritizations and idea of what's important and what are we trying to do. It's it's a lot of work.
Well, maybe on that, like, how do you manage that? Because it's somewhat unprecedented, right? Like, you can't really look at any other comps. There's not a lot of other companies that have grown as fast and as quickly. And so, you say the whole organization has to change. There's no blueprint for it. So is there one or two things that you've thought about or you've done tactically that has helped in this journey?
I think really, I would just kind of keep it simple and just pick one, which is it comes down to leadership and focus, and then what does the leadership focus talk about all the time? And what's been really interesting is so Sam, when he does all hands, and he always speaks at all hands, he always has a few minutes, right? He doesn't speak to all hands, but he always has a few minutes. But when he does, he chooses to focus on research or compute, and those are the two things he just always kinds of talks about. And so that centers the company because it's just the CEO kind of sets the tone. And it's funny, like there've been times when I or other execs have been like, well, no, we need to talk about a bunch of these other things, and he will nix like whole parts of presentations or like take like what should have been a 20-minute presentation on what a normal company would actually spend 20 minutes on and an all hands, and it'll be like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that during the course of all this growth, you'd be confused because like, no, these are important normal company things to talk about. But in retrospect, like it's very clear what he was doing, right? It's like through all of this chaos and change, it's like he was trying to make very clear what the main thing was, and just kind of have that be a ballast.
Ruthless prioritization, right?
Yeah.
Super.
And sending like a very clear message.
Yeah. I think we have room for one more. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks very much for being here with us. What can you share about how OpenAI is thinking about its role to play in commerce? Obviously, you had the announcement earlier this week. People ask for recommendations of products, look for specific queries, comparisons, things like that. Sam Altman's been on record very publicly as not wanting to go down the advertising route. What can you share about how you think about that huge opportunity of what people are asking for help with, and what your role might be in delivering that, and then how you might monetize that? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, we want to kind of approach this like an ecosystem player. I think that's the first thing. And so, this is, it's kind of going back to that, like what that Bill Gates quote, which is like, you're not really a platform unless you create a lot more value for everybody else than you create for yourself. And I think that's probably a very good principle to think about how we approach this space. And I think the other part of this is, even when you think about it from a technical standpoint, which is the real sort of beauty of the reasoning capabilities and the agentic capabilities expressing in this way as like an interesting engineering and science problem is not if it does everything inside of ChatGPT itself, but if it's able to actually execute an indeterminate number of transactions with an indeterminate number of commercial players, right? And like that is actually like a much more interesting technical achievement. And so I think that people are excited to kind of build on that, and that is partly what the Agentic Commerce Protocol is about. And so I think you could, those are probably two strong indicators of how we think about this.
One more?
I'll make this quick, but thank you again for presenting. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, the application versus the model layer, Cursor versus Claude, where's the value come from? And, do you see OpenAI coming into moving up the stack?
I mean, I think you can just look at our actions here with Cursor, which is that we've decided to partner with them because they've just done a very good job executing when it comes to actually the application space. Anthropic's probably taking a slightly different view in terms of how they want to go further into the application space. And it might just be that, that it's not necessarily always like a matter of like you have decided permanently that one thing is a particular type of approach. It's just that you have this, this company with an amazing founder in Michael, and they've done an excellent job executing, and they've crafted some, way in, sort of bringing to light to engineers. And so, it's a good partnership and a strong one that we are pretty happy with. I think when it comes to the coding capabilities itself, for our own research, what's interesting to us really is thinking about that as how to advance our own research, because the ability to actually, have, automated software engineering is going to also increase the rate at which you can run a bunch of experiments and do the research itself for AI. And that is, the core of our interest.
Great. Maybe just to wrap everything up, if you're sitting here 1 year from now at our next IA summit in 2026, what's one thing that you'd be excited that OpenAI would have accomplished over the last 12 months over everything that OpenAI is doing right now?
Man, so I think that's such an interesting question, but there's a bunch of things on the model side that could be that I could pick, but I think it's like you could just look at our current state of activities and just extrapolate that out over 12 months and say we just continue to deliver on those things, and that would still be exciting, right? So we've got agentic commerce, and if that really works, there'll be a decent ecosystem of lots of building on top of that, and a lot of additional opportunity for people. We've got a new video platform that is intended to help creators monetize too. And so there's a lot of potential opportunity there for lots of other people. And the third here is we just announced a bunch of partnerships to build more compute. And we're going to do that with a bunch of players, including Microsoft and Oracle. And that's also going to provide a lot of opportunity both for those partners as well as people who are going to use that compute. And so I think just executing on those things over the next 12 to 18 months and seeing what everybody else is going to do with it, I think that is actually the thing that's going to be really interesting.
That's terrific.
And fun.
It's going to be really fun next year. Well, Jason, thank you so much. Let's all give a big round of applause. Thanks. So appreciate it. Thanks.